When we think about philosophy, we often have in mind philosophy as a particular set of ideas, a particular body of knowledge, a particular way of thinking about the world. We might say, that I have a particular philosophy that differs from your philosophy. We might talk about the differences between Immanuel Kant's philosophy and the philosophy articulated by a thinker like David Hume. And in that respect, we're thinking about, again, a body of knowledge, a set of ideas, a particular vision of the world. So that perspective of philosophy isn't mistaken. In fact, developing and grasping, understanding a particular philosophical view, a particular worldview, is an important element of philosophical study. But it's not the only important way to understand philosophy, and arguably it's not the most important. There's another way we can understand philosophy, and that is philosophy as a particular kind of thinking activity, as Elliot D. Cohen puts it in his book, Philosophers at Work. Philosophy is a particular kind of thought process. And we get some indication about what that thinking activity looks like when we read Solomon and Higgins and their texts, Really Big Questions. And there they lay it out. They say that philosophy can be understood as a particular kind of intellectual labor that consists of the following. To do philosophy is to deploy reflection, to reflect upon the world, to reflect upon our ideas, our experiences, our feelings. And it also entails articulation. So more than merely silently contemplating our experiences, we must also take the step of expressing those thoughts. And I'm sure, as most of you can relate to, it's one thing to have an idea in your mind. It's quite another to be able to express it in an intelligible manner, in a way that is understood by others. The other step to thinking philosophically involves not only reflecting upon and then articulating, but also being able to justify a particular idea, a particular claim, a particular perspective. And to justify means to argue. Here, by argue, I don't mean engage in a verbally combative dispute with another person, but to argue here simply means to give reasons, to explain what idea gives rise to a particular claim. Why is it that you know, for example, that one behavior or another behavior is wrong or unjust? Or why have you labeled a particular interaction with another person as unfair? What premises does that conclusion that you have drawn, that inference that you've made, what is the basis of that belief? That's what it means to argue or to justify one's thoughts. The next step, or one other important step in thinking philosophically, is engaging in analysis. And that is to say, to take apart the pieces of a particular argument or a particular thought process and to figure out which is the claim and which is the reason for the claim. And also, are the reasons given for the claim actually reasons that are relevant to the claim? And this may seem like a strange question to ask, but as a matter of fact, we are often not always cogent and clear and reasoned in our thought process, which is why analysis is so important, whether we're analyzing our own thoughts and ideas or we're analyzing those of others. In addition to reflection, articulation, argumentation or justification, and also in addition to analysis, there is this crucial other step that at least many philosophers believe is core to the philosophical enterprise, and that is synthesis. And what is meant here by synthesis is that we're not only trying to grasp, make sense of one particular localized concern or issue in our life, but we also want to be able to tie in that particular understanding or concern or belief or argument, tie it together with other arguments. If, for example, someone wants to make an argument pertaining to, let us say, a controversial topic like abortion, and they want to argue that abortion is immoral, for example, because it involves the taking of a life. Well, that moral premise that the taking of a life is wrong is going to have implications. It's going to have logical implications that go beyond that particular topic. It's going to end up having something to say about people's perspective on capital punishment. It's going to have something to say about notions of self-defense. It's going to have something to say about warfare. And just to be clear, this example does not suggest that one can't find a way to square their opposition to something like abortion with these other views. Philosophy isn't about, it's not a gotcha game. It's not an attempt to seize upon what might end up being an error. After all, from the philosopher's point of view, errors are a dime a dozen. We are filled with errors. Those who presume themselves to be the wisest and to be, the least in need of scrutiny, those who tend to believe themselves to be the most impervious to error are typically precisely the people committing the most errors, or at least doing so without a healthy awareness that allows them to take in crucial, critical feedback and engage in productive dialogue with others. So the point here, though, is whatever our arguments may be, if, for example, someone wants to argue that, of course, women are entitled to an abortion and it's only their business and it's nobody else's business, people get to do whatever they want to do with their body, if that were the extent of the argument, it would have implications for what people are allowed to do with their bodies in other instances. And there are scenarios where we want people to, where we actually believe people have limits on what they can do to their bodies, especially when it has implications for others. Or let's imagine someone were to make an argument in favor of abortion that was premised on the idea that people should be able to make their own personal decisions as they pertain to their family, and nobody should have any input. Nobody should be giving any input from the outside. Well, again, that kind of claim would have implications. Consider, for example, that all of us believe, at least I would imagine most of us believe, that it's perfectly legitimate for someone outside of a home to intervene when a parent is engaging in objectively abusive behavior. And that is an infringement to some extent on the parent's abilities or rights to sort of decide how to parent. Perhaps they have a belief that a kind of corporal punishment that results in bruises is morally acceptable to them. But perhaps the wider world in which they live has come to the ethical conclusion that corporal punishment ought never result in a kind of a kind of injury that is as lasting as something like a bruise. And of course, you could see how we could get into the weeds of Should we argue against corporal punishment altogether? Because someone might say, well, this particular child bruises easily, and so you can't take a bruise to be indicative of child abuse. You can see how complex a question like this might be, though someone might flippantly post a social media comment or engage in a water cooler conversation that just sort of treats this as a very simple matter. There's really not much to talk about. There's no need for much in terms of reflection, articulation, argumentation, or analysis. But a little bit of deeper thought will soon reveal that matters are often more complex than they appear. Now, what I mean to say about synthesis is just this, that instead of merely having seemingly worked out our beliefs as it pertains to this single event or this single issue, philosophy comes along and says that your claims that are used in the service of this particular claim today, this reason you've given in the service of this particular conclusion you are arguing for or you're saying is true, those reasons should be also applicable whenever we're talking about relevantly similar circumstances. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about synthesis, a bringing together of all of our different beliefs and ideas to see if they actually cohere, to see if they fit together like a seamless puzzle. And of course, the answer to that question is inevitably they don't fit so well together. There are people who will argue, for example, that of course it's wrong to engage in, let's say, allowing dogs to fight each other to the death because that's cruel, because these are sensitive creatures and their life matters. And yet someone might say, well, okay, and does that imply that we have certain moral obligations to animals like those that we eat? And then if someone were to say, yes, well, normally we would, except we have to eat to survive, then one might simply point out that we typically don't eat bacon to survive. We eat bacon because, well, we like the taste of bacon. Not because it's particularly healthy for us, because as a matter of fact, it's not healthy. We would all be healthier if we stopped eating bacon, right? And lots of red meat along that way. A Harvard study found that eating small amounts of red meat on a daily basis would significantly increase our mortality rate. As much as 20%. And so, again, the objective of philosophy is not a body of knowledge which tells you what is right and what is wrong and what to do and how to conduct yourself. Philosophy is arguably better understood as a particular kind of intellectual activity that seeks after not only the truth in one corner of human existence, in one corner of human thought, reflection, and living, but seeks to bring the insights, the wisdom, the claims together into a harmonious orchestra of ideas. The philosopher Niles Rowett writes in his book, Ultimate Questions, Thinking About Philosophy, quote, in a broad sense, philosophy can be understood as an attempt to develop a big picture view of the universe with the help of reason. He writes, we can start to philosophize when we present arguments in defense of our big picture view of reality. And there you find a philosopher highlighting the importance of what I've just articulated as synthesis, that bringing together all of the various seemingly disconnected aspects of our belief system into an attempted harmony. Now, with that said, I think it's important for us to talk a little bit more about the meaning of this word reason. You will find that reason is often something referred to, it has a couple of distinct meanings depending on its context. More on that in a moment. But as with so many words, as with so many ideas, our culture can treat them as if they are just obvious in their meaning, as if no additional discussion, elaboration, or explanation is necessary. And this is, I think, one of the great values of philosophy for all of us. It takes that which is arguably vital to living a meaningful, fulfilling, knowledgeable human existence that is typically treated in a perfunctory way, and it breathes new life and vitality into those ideas. So here I mean, again, everything from God and love and justice and right and wrong to even really basic terms like reason. Now, in the most basic sense, to reason is to infer. Now, the problem there is that the problem of the word reason is probably applicable to the problem to infer as well, because again, we use these words in this unthinking, perfunctory manner without necessarily breaking them down and elaborating on them and so forth. So let me just say that in this most basic sense, to reason or to infer is just to come to a conclusion about something on the basis or because of something else that you believe to be reliable or believe to be true. So, maybe it's something like you meet a friend and they have a dog. You observe the dog. You think that the dog has certain characteristics that remind you of a pit bull. You ask the dog owner, you say, "Is this a pit bull?" And they say, "Well, yes, it is." Now, you know that this dog is a pit bull, and you infer or you reason that since this dog is a pit bull, it is dangerous. Now, those of you who love pit bulls and believe that this is a stereotype, don't be offended. It's just an example. And as a matter of fact, the point of the example is to highlight that there is a reason for the conclusion that is not necessarily named. It might not only not be named in a discussion with your friend who wants to know why you are refusing to come inside the house or insisting that the dog be locked into its kennel, but it might not even be named in your own thought process. You may simply say, "Look, it's a pit bull, therefore it's a dangerous dog." What's missing from that thought process, that the conscious thought process, is a very potent interpretive belief. And that interpretive belief is that pit bulls are dangerous dogs. That's a pit bull. Pit bulls are dangerous dogs. Therefore, that's a dangerous dog. That would be deductive reasoning. That would be a kind of inference we've made. Now, to reason is to organize our ideas with a particular eye for logical consistency. We want to make sure that our train of thought is orderly, that it's sensible, that the reasons we have that generate particular conclusions are reliable. So that, for example, if our belief that that's a pit bull is mistaken, then our conclusion that that's a dangerous dog is not reliable. We've made an error in our assessment of things. Furthermore, even if it is a pit bull, if our claim that pit bulls are somehow inherently dangerous animals, if that claim is mistaken, then once again, our reasoning is flawed. And notice how flawed reasoning can give rise to conclusions which then and thereafter give rise to feelings, or really quite simultaneously. You believe strongly that pit bulls are dangerous animals. You see this dog that you're convinced is a pit bull. You not only logically or rather through the intellect say to yourself, this is therefore a dangerous dog, really what you probably do more than anything is start to feel afraid and, get upset even, and start saying to your friend, what are you doing to me? Why is this dog here? Are you trying to hurt me? And so on. And so our thought processes give rise to the basis of our feelings. Feelings do not fall from the heavens. They are rather generated from the soil of our beliefs. And so again, to reason is to organize our ideas with an eye for a kind of logical consistency and, of course, for truthfulness. If our premises that give birth, that give rise to our conclusions are mistaken, then we're in trouble. Now, when we reason, we think, or at least we strive to think rationally. We strive to coordinate our ideas to ensure our understanding is free from contradictions and other kinds of errors or fallacies. There are countless numbers of ways to be wrong. It is much harder to be correct. And the more that one studies the myriad of fallacies that one can fall prey to, you develop a degree of humility. And I think that philosophy is quite helpful in facilitating this kind of intellectual humility. Now, what I mean by all of this is that reasoning in this fashion means identifying the reasons or what we believe are the reliable beliefs that support our claims, that support our conclusions about the world, whether these are empirical claims like this is a door or this is a good paper or that behavior is immoral or what have you. We're looking for reasons that are reliable upon which to base our assertions about the world. So when we reason, we aren't satisfied with simply devising an argument that is convincing to someone else. Reasoning at its heart is not about manipulation. It is not about promotion. It is not about material gain. Now, reason can certainly be deployed in the service of some of these objectives, but at its core, as it's been developed as an idea, as a practice in philosophical thought from the beginning, the aim of reason is nothing short of truth, of accuracy in thought, the elimination or the effort, the striving to overcome error in pursuit of intellectual congruency and integrity. So again, we can say that when we reason, we're not just interested, we're not just satisfied with devising some temporarily convincing argument. We want to make sure that the justifications for the claim that we are advancing, that's being discussed, that maybe somebody's asking us about or asking us to defend, can withstand scrutiny. Not only now, but also can it withstand scrutiny when it comes up in the context of another conversation. For example, if we're going to argue that feeling strongly about something being true is itself a sufficient condition for something being true, then we need to consider the implications that premise has for other arguments. So follow me on this. What I mean is, if we want to say that we know that God exists because we feel so strongly about it, that there's just no way that these strong feelings we have about God's existence could be wrong. Now, if you think that this isn't a particularly compelling example, just think about how people will rely on strong feeling to justify perhaps a claim about love or a claim about something else that they think is true. Now, if we're going to say that strong feelings are a reliable indicator of something's truthfulness. We need to be prepared for when that same premise comes up in other arguments that we're unwilling to tolerate its presence in. We also need to be prepared when maybe a strong feeling is being used in support of a claim that is opposite of the one we're advancing, in which case we have a problem because we seem to be saying that something is both true and not true at the same time. Let me give you an example. Beth feels very strongly that God exists. Therefore, Beth says God exists. Only problem here is that Beth does not believe in monotheism. Beth embraces a Judeo-Christian conception of God. Diane, on the other hand, feels very strongly that Zeus exists and therefore concludes that Zeus must exist. Now, Diane and Beth's ideas are in conflict, at least from the perspective of Beth. And yet, if Beth is going to reject Diane's claim that Zeus exists, she's going to have to say that the fact Diane feels strongly about Zeus's existence is not a good enough reason. But once she does that, it's going to end up hurting her earlier argument that her own embraced conception of God exists. And what that may point out, what we may find in that kind of activity is simply that we were wrong to try to defend a claim about the world simply on the basis that we felt strongly about it. And that's to say nothing about, let's say, Eric, who believes that that both of these claims about Zeus and the Judeo-Christian God are both mistaken. Eric is an atheist. Eric believes very strongly that there are no gods. Now, again, what I would say, and I'm pretty sure many of you listening to me would say, is that all three of them are wrong to try to defend a claim about the world simply by referring to a strong feeling. We have strong feelings all the time. Some of them are proven to be valid. We have intuition, which sometimes leads us correctly, and sometimes it doesn't, right? So this process that I've just described, this intellectual interrogation and testing and effort to organize our beliefs and claims, that's what reasoning is about. And that, to a significant extent, is what philosophy concerns itself with. I think it's also interesting, it's worth mentioning, another way of thinking about reason, which pairs well and in many ways is neatly aligned with the one that I've just shared with you, but also takes a slightly different take on the bigger picture perspective and concerns of reason. In his work, Man for Himself, an inquiry into the psychology of ethics, the innovative social theorist Erich Fromm, writing in 1947, wrote, "Most of our thinking is necessarily concerned with the achievement of practical results, with the quantitative and superficial aspects of phenomena, without inquiring into the validity of implied ends and premises, and without attempting to understand the nature and quality of phenomena." So what he's highlighting here is a sort of recognition that a lot of our thinking is superficial. It's interested in sort of short-term concerns. How do we make the sale? How do we make the rocket blast? How do we take care of this immediate concern, this problem before us? And this is not to say that these problems are unimportant to our lives. What to cook for dinner, for example. But what he's highlighting is that being human requires a ability to look beyond what is simply obvious and on the surface, but to dig deeper, to ensure that, for example, we might say, yes, what to make for dinner. But what is the reason that we want to eat dinner? We want to eat dinner because, well, we want to nourish our bodies. But are we going to nourish our bodies with the meal that we have in mind to make? Or is this meal going to actually make us unwell? If so, is it a bit of an absurdity to take an activity that is ostensibly purposed to nourish the body, to actually harm the body? And then perhaps somebody says, well, but you've misunderstood eating. Eating, yes, is to some extent about, nourishing the body, but it's also about enjoyment. It's also one of the great things about being human, about being alive, is you get to eat this delicious food. And yes, some of it's terrible for you, but it's so good. And in that sense, one could say that eating this particular meal, which isn't terribly healthy for you, but it's being done in the service of a delight, of a joy in being a living being capable of tasting and, being attentive to the enjoyment of food. And that would be a deeper form of understanding in contrast to the superficial. So I don't want you to get the sense that I'm representing Fromm's ideas here to mean he's critical of anyone thinking about just ordinary life. His concern is when our thinking about ordinary life is cut off from deeper matters of more existential concern, like why are we alive and what do we want to do with this life and what gives us deep and satisfying fulfillment. So he goes on to say that reason, in contrast to this kind of superficial way of understanding the world, is a particular kind of thinking that seeks understanding of, quote, the essence of things and processes. While reason is not divorced from the practical aims of life, it is not a mere tool for immediate action. Its function is to know, to understand, to grasp, to relate oneself to things by comprehending them. And I'll just pause there that his point is, instead of merely interacting with the world as if a series of objects that are simply physically manipulatable, his sense is that reason fosters in us a kind of intelligent, conscious interaction with the world. So again, he says, reason's function, quote, is to know, to understand, to grasp, to relate oneself to things by comprehending them. It penetrates through the surface of things in order to discover their essence, their hidden relationships and deeper meanings, their, quote, reason. What is the essence of things? What is the real basis of a claim, of a belief?